after that, the big speed hump effect through the middle of the shoe, it feels like the geometry is just a little bit too subtle to the front, so not aggressive enough. Because so just a couple sessions done and dusted in this shoe. Now this is the 361 degrees Furious Future 2, and these are my first impressions. But before we get into it, and if you guys haven't done so already and you want to support the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. So this one jumped on my radar when I was browsing through the Berlin Marathon Expo. 361 had a bit of a stall set up, and I got to have a good look at this one, got it in my hand, and also the new Flame as well. And I was quite impressed with how far the brand had come, especially I noticed the difference in the foam. So this one's always been on my radar since then to test and run in. So I finally got it now. Now with the specs, so if you go to the official websites here from 361, this one is retailing in Australia at about $348 it says, and in the US, I believe you can pick it up for about $220. Now, you can pick up this shoe at about $60 cheaper on AliExpress, or if you can get in work out Taobao, I think you can get it for about $90 cheaper. Now in the weight, I know it's a race shoe, so it's not the lightest race shoe out there, but it still doesn't really feel that heavy on the foot. So this shoe, 213 grams or 7.5 ounces. Now that's in my size. This is a Euro 41. And in the stack, so the official website says about 36 in the rear, 30 in the front. But I do believe that they're probably not measuring those stack outs, including the inner sole or the sock liner and probably the outsole, because to me, it doesn't feel like a 36 millimeter shoe. It certainly feels much more like a 40 miller stack. And in the upper, well, first and foremost, looking at the silhouette of the shoe, it really does remind me of the Alpha Fly 3. So same sort of designed with the one-piece booty. However, they are using different materials here. So the main material in this upper is what they call carbon silk. Now, the material, it's not very flexible. It's got a really plasticky type feel, a really fine mesh, but the breathability, I must say, is not too bad. With our heel counter, pretty solid here at the back, so your heel sits right back in this heel. You can see we've got a bit of an angle there and up towards the pull tab. So pretty structured for a race shoe, but there's a little bit of play there, a little bit of bend. With the padding though, the only real padding in the shoe is this internal heel pad, which is quite generous, and I quite like the feel of that one. With the tongue, as I've just mentioned before, it's a stretch knit tongue, very similar to the Alpha Fly. It's pretty hard to actually squeeze your foot into this one. With a lacing system, so again, I think it's copying a little bit from what the Alpha Fly's got going on, not really having these eyelets, but it just sort of weaves through the upper material, and it's really hard to actually cinch up or sort of work these eyelets out because the laces don't really like to slide through what's going on here. But all in all, the laces don't play too much of a part in this shoe because the booty knit upper, or the stretch knit upper, and the booty design of the shoe, it's actually quite tight, so you don't have to do much with the laces to get a good lockdown through the midfoot. Now, what was a little bit concerning once I did put the shoe on was I didn't feel super secure around the heel area, and that's when I've tried to adjust the laces to try to do something else, but I couldn't really fix the issue. But on the run, I couldn't feel it at all, so I didn't even have any heel slippage. So it was just a sensation, I think, walking around in the shoe that my heel may have had some heel slippage, but it certainly didn't bother me on the run at all. In the fit, I'm going to say, well, first and foremost, in the fit with these Chinese companies, I come at least a half size down or a full size down because they're usually pretty long. So I don't look at my normal US size because it doesn't align with the Euro size. So in these Chinese shoes, I'm going off the Euro size. So usually in the big brands, so New Balance, Hoka, Nike, whatever, I'm a 42, and that equals a US 8.5. But in these Chinese shoes, I'm going 41s, and they are fitting the same as a Euro 42 or a US 8.5. Pretty good in the width department as well, and toe box volume is fine. And in the outsole, so they are using an RPU outsole covering. Now, it certainly feels different to your standard rubber that you'll probably find in some of the bigger brands out there. It feels more similar to that CPU compound they've got going in some other shoes out there. But pretty thin covering here. One big segment, as you can see, we've got some little cutouts, but overall I don't think that this big segment really affects the ride of the shoe. but performance-wise in the grip department. So it was tested today in some extremely wet conditions, and this thing performed amazing. So lots of confidence in this shoe, especially with cornering. There was no slippage, greasy roads, even a wooden boardwalk. It actually performed quite well. So pretty impressed there. Durability, not too concerned. It's a race shoe, but I do predict that this RPU is going to be pretty resilient. And in the midsole, so the foam they're using here is called CQT Extreme. Now it is a pure PEBA midsole. So a couple of layers of that, and then we've got their quick-bone carbon plate. Now the carbon plate is probably the most interesting thing. What's going on in this midsole? So it's not just a flat, like typical spoon shape as you would see. It's got some curves in it, and it's also got a little bit of a wing here on the inside at the rear. But I'm going to say that it is a super rigid plate, and it does create a good amount of stability in such a soft feeling type shoe. But rigidity wise, this thing does not bend whatsoever. Got to be one of the stiffest shoes on the market. Another little feature here is this little window that we've got just under the carbon plate. So you can just see that's just foam in there, that PEBA foam. But yeah, that's probably there just to add a bit of a bounce effect to the shoe through the middle part there. And in the geometry department, very interesting. So looking at the side profile again, it does really remind me of what's going on in the Alpha Fly. So it extends here at the rear, and then a really sort of aggressive heel bevel here. So you'll see most of the foam is really pretty much just under where the mid of the ankle joint is. And then we've got a pretty early, and by the look of it, it feels like it's an aggressive rocker as well, but I must say it felt different on the run. And in the ride, well, I must say I'm a little bit confused by this one at this early stage. So first and foremost, I'll talk about the properties of the foam and how they feel. So in the softness department, so is it soft? Well, it is extremely soft through the heel. So this heel will just pretty much collapse, just like the Puma Fast R. However, not too much instability through the rear, just because it's got this unique shaped carbon plate that just shores things up there. So super soft through the rear. So you don't get much of a bounce sensation through the rear. Through the midfoot though, you get that big speed hump sensation that you'll find in some other shoes. So the Hoka Cielo X1 2.0 and also the Mizuno Wave Rebellion shoes have also got that feeling of most of the foam is through the midfoot, and that's where you think that the magic happens in the shoe. And then looking at the side of this shoe, you can sort of see through the midfoot here, that's where this crazy coyote is, and the shape of the plate. So that's where you're getting most of the bounce in this shoe. So really soft in the heel. Most of the bounce is coming through the midfoot when you hit the speed hump. But then as we're rolling forward, so onto the rocker, now this is where we're looking for our responsive poppiness. This is where we're looking for some power out of the forefoot, some propulsion. But I must say that I'm not actually getting much out of the front of the shoe. Certainly getting a lot out of the middle of the shoe, but not much through the middle. And that's why I think the ride is quite confusing. So I feel like the big speed hump effect in the shoe that other shoes nail, particularly the Hoka Cielo X1 2.0, absolutely nails that effect, that speed hump, because it's got a super aggressive early rocker, and it tips the shoe off that speed hump quite fast and quite aggressively, and it allows you to dig right into the foam, and you've got this really powerful rocker to power off on. So this one to me confusing, because after that, the big speed hump effect through the middle of the shoe, it feels like the geometry is just a little bit too subtle to the front. So not aggressive enough, because it feels just more like a normal race shoe. And that for me doesn't feel like you're getting the most out of the shoe. But as I said, it's still early days. Now pace ranges that I've tested this one out. So I've gave it through a range of paces at it. So steady pace, so just under your marathon pace. I've even just jogged in it. Tested it out at marathon pace, half marathon, and then tried to pick it up to 10K, 5K. Now, where did it feel good? So for me, at marathon pace, I don't really think it worked for me. As I said, that speed hump was just really dominant through the middle, and it kind of got quite annoying at marathon pace, because I just kept hitting the speed hump, and I couldn't get much more out of it. And then going up into half marathon pace, I didn't really feel good there either, because I didn't feel I was getting enough power out of the shoe, out of the front of the shoe. I wasn't getting enough propulsion or pop. And then obviously I really did struggle just to get it going any faster. Yes, I could run in it faster, but it just didn't feel like the shoe wanted to go there. So for me, it actually felt in between, better at in between paces. So in between half marathon and marathon pace, which is a bit of a limbo zone for my pace range. So yeah, and that's probably at about maybe 3-minute 50 Ks to 4-minute Ks is probably where it felt nice. But it also felt nice going actually slower. So around 4-minute 30 kilometers as well, when I was just sort of jogging around in the shoe or going at that steady pace. So yeah, quite interesting. But again, what I will say though, stability of the ride was absolutely excellent. And I must say, once you hit the sweet spot in the shoe, it did feel quite efficient as well. So likes in this shoe so far, firstly, number one has to be probably the stability of the ride. For it being a race shoe with some soft foams, surprised with how stable it was. Also how this outsole performed in the wet conditions, and I do like the booty knit designed upper. And what I'm still figuring out is the geometry and how it's going to work best with the way that I run. And dislike certainly has to be the lacing system. It's just way too hard to adjust and move around these laces. And just wrapping up my first impressions here, well, I must say that I'm not sold on the shoe yet, as you could probably see. It's really hard to make some early predictions with the shoe. As I've said before, it doesn't really feel good for me at marathon pace, and it doesn't feel fast enough for me at half marathon pace, but it feels good in between the paces. So it feels good slower than marathon pace and feels good in between marathon pace and half marathon pace. So it might feel good for you guys out there at those other paces. Obviously, it's just got to do with how we strike the ground, our cadence, our weight, etc. But yeah, still lots of testing to go for me in this one. I'm still going to continue on with it. I don't hate the shoe at all. It's just a fun experience, I think, just to work the shoe out and find out where it's going to sit with me. But anyway, guys, that's it from me. Any questions you've got regarding the shoe, how it relates to anything else, hit me up in the comments. Thanks for watching. Make sure you give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time.